Well, let's speak to Paymaster General Nick Thomas-Symonds, who joins us now. Good to see you this morning. Let's start with Ricky Jones, shall we? The suspended Labour councillor. He has been arrested. I know we're limited about what we can say, but for allegedly talking about the rioters, saying that they are disgusting, nothing fascists. We need to cut all of their throats and get rid of them all. What do you have to say about that behaviour and that language from a Labour councillor?
Well, look, firstly, it's very good to join you this morning, as always. In relation to that individual, he was immediately suspended from the Labour Party. There has now been an arrest, so there's an investigation ongoing. So I'm obviously going to be circumspect in what I now say, but moving from the individual case, just to say, look, it doesn't matter who you are. If you are out on our streets, if you are found to be, or you plead guilty to violence on our streets or threats of violence, then you will face the full force of the law, whoever you are. And I think that's a very strong message the government has been sending out. You've seen the sentences that have been handed down. You know, we've seen concluded cases with up to 3 year sentences handed down for violent disorder only days before. That's the government's position. It doesn't matter who you are. You will be held to account for your actions.
Yeah, and look, and that's absolutely right, and that's as it should be, of course. But can we talk about semantics a little bit? Because language actually is hugely important in all of this, and I wonder if that's been fully acknowledged. Because, again, not talking about this particular case, but someone who perhaps did something similar, right, and being dealt with, quite right, but we're not calling them far left, are we? And yet anyone else who's actually seems to be showing dissatisfaction at the moment, and never mind the thugs, and we're not trying to defend anybody who's committing criminal damage or criminal behaviour, but it's been problematic calling people far right, hasn't it? Because that's labelling a group of people, a lot of whom don't feel they fit into that particular box. So I wonder if the government needs to consider its language a bit more carefully.
Well, no, I don't agree with that, because when we've been talking about far-right thugs on our streets, we're talking about the people who've gone out with the intent of violence, frankly. They don't turn up with legitimate concerns. They turn up with weapons. They create havoc on our streets. They wreak violence. What we are not talking about, let's just make this distinction very, very clear, because I was out in the general election up and down the country for 6 weeks. I was up and down the country campaigning for months and even years before that. And I had many conversations on the doorsteps with people concerned about a variety of things, cost of living, public services, and indeed levels of migration. But when I was having those conversations on the doorsteps about levels of migration, these were decent, law-abiding people who were never dream of going out on our doorsteps creating violence. So let's just make that distinction. The far-right thugs on our streets, that minority of people who have been causing havoc on our streets, going out intent on violence, that's one group. And they are being dealt with very firmly and robustly. But people who raise legitimate concerns about migration is completely different. They are not people who would engage in that sort of violence and thuggery. And it's really important, as we were saying in the general election, that we listen to those concerns. That's what this government is doing.
Right, but how then do you... I mean, you need to get that message across then, don't you? Because, I mean, certainly I've talked to people who were out in Blackpool when there was trouble there. Now, these aren't people who were engaging in trouble. That is a small minority, as is always the case with these sort of things. They were out just protesting like anybody else, like the counter-protests have been doing. They were just out there protesting and feeling that their voices weren't being heard, and now they, whatever you say, whatever Keir's said, they feel like they have been labelled far right, and that hurts them. And they've said to me, well, they feel like Sir Keir Starmer has just thrown fuel on the fire with his language.
I don't agree with that throwing fuel on fire at all, actually. And I think there is a very clear distinction here. People who, there's a tradition in our country of peaceful protest. That's a very fine tradition. I wouldn't, by the way, having visited police officers on the front line in Bristol yesterday, be encouraging people to go out on the streets at the moment. It certainly wouldn't be appropriate for me to be doing that, and I wouldn't. But there is a fine tradition in the UK of peaceful protest, but that is completely different from people who turn up, the far-right thugs who turn up, whose intent is not to protest about any issue. Their intent is to bring about havoc. Their intent is to commit criminal offences, and we've seen them going out committing criminal offences, and they will be dealt with appropriately, as we've been seeing. And in addition to that, we will also, as well as the criminal justice system dealing with them quickly and robustly, there will also be these additional thousands of specialist police officers available, who we thank them for the work that they are doing. Hugely important to have that visible presence on our streets to deter people, but to reassure communities as well. And the government is in that heightened state of readiness now going into the weekend.
Well, let's talk about the weekend, shall we? Because reports on some of the papers this morning that the police are examining links between what they're describing as far-right extremists and football hooligans. They're concerned about more violent flare-ups over the weekend. Are you expecting further disorder, and what is the government doing to prepare for that?
Well, the government is vigilant going into the weekend. I think that it's really important that there is now no let-up in the strategy we've been using to send out a very clear message. We will not tolerate a breakdown of law and order on any of our streets anywhere. Going into the weekend, I'd expect the sentences and the cases being dealt with in our criminal justice system to continue day by day, and we'll ensure that there are contingency plans to make sure that that is the case in terms of, for example, the number of Crown prosecutors making charging decisions and how quickly courts have capacity to then deal with people. But secondly, and I was pleased to be able to say thank you to police officers in Avon and Somerset yesterday who'd been out policing disorder, and to thank them for putting themselves in harm's way. We are again looking to our frontline police on the weekend. Indeed, these additional officers will continue to be available, thousands of officers able to be deployed up and down the country. We're very much keeping them on high alert going into the weekend, doing everything we can to keep people safe.